address the topic of fear, of shame, and of guilt. So many times when we're not aware of what's on the other side, it paralyzes us. It's interesting because a couple years ago, I got the opportunity to meet and talk with Mark Devine, creator of SEALFIT, Coral Camp, a few other things. He's a former SEAL and highly decorated, just amazing individual. But it was interesting because I was talking with him about going through the whole SEAL training and what he thought was the major difference between those who made it and those who didn't. And he actually was able to answer very, very quickly. He said, it's easy. He said, it's why. For those that knew what their why was, why they were there, they were able to overcome the fear, the pain. He said, what it is, it's a psychological battle. It's just like everything in life. It's a psychological battle. And in this battle, when we have a strong enough why, we can overcome any how. And so the way I correlate that to treatment is, we already know it works. It's evidence-based, it's backed by research, treatment works. But the biggest thing is, how do I overcome the fear? How do I overcome the shame and the guilt to take that first step to get in, to get the help? I've worked with thousands and thousands of individuals over the last decade and a half. And once that first fear, that first shame step in, we already tend to project the worst case scenario. So going back to this whole SEAL scenario with Mark, he says there's a reason why we train and train again and retrain and train and train and train. Because you ultimately revert back to the lowest level of training. And if we don't train, we cannot perform. It's incredible. Because again, it goes back to that psychological battle. We haven't done the training of how to work through the guilt. We haven't done the training of how to work through the fear and the shame, because it's all an illusion. It's all created in here. And as we understand this, we can then begin to open up. First, to save people such as family. We've worked with so many individuals, and at first they thought, I will bring so much shame to the family, especially for those that think that they have to be the rock for the family, that everyone looks to and turns to in order to be this projected rock. And once they start looking at family, the family says, we never put that on you. That's something that you've done internally, or we thought that's something that you wanted and had part as of an identity, and so we leaned into you because you were where we thought to look. Either way, it plays into this whole aspect. Let me give you an example. Addiction is a disease. For some reason, we've created such this negative stigma out in society, and it perpetuates this. But it's so interesting because times are changing, especially now. Now is the greatest time in history to get sober, to understand what this is. And it's amazing the movements that have been created by people that at first stand up scared and say, I am so ashamed of this. And when they share, they are welcomed with open arms and saying, me too. Just because an individual has an addiction to a drug or alcohol as opposed to something else is irrelevant. We all have addictions, but when it comes to this, we tend to think this is so much darker and dirtier and something that we're so ashamed of. So by taking that first step and saying, I'm gonna walk through, I'm gonna step through the fear, I'm gonna step into courage. Just like Mark Devine was saying, when I stepped into, even though it was unknown, even though all the stories you hear is just so terrible and how it's painful and psychologically jacks with you, when you know your why, you can go through anything. That's why we ask people, what is your why? Whether it's for you, for family, whatever it is, it's something bigger. It's something outside of ourselves. We are able to step through, and what we find on the other side of that fear, of that shame, of that guilt is actually open arms welcoming us. Totally welcoming us into what it takes to step into our greatness. Working with so many former soldiers, it's amazing what they say on the other end. They say, I had no idea I could make it this far, how great it is. It started over here with a tiny mustard seed of faith of stating, I can do this. if I fully commit and I just surrender to whatever this scenario and process looks like. And as they work through, they come out this end and say, oh my gosh, had you told me back then of everything that I'd have to do, there's no way in hell I would have thought I would make it to here. But I'm so glad I did. See, recovery and addiction is no different than anything else. We tend to look internally and think I'm broken. I'm a failure, I'm a mess up, I'm not good enough, I'll never be good enough. But those are the lies, that's the fear, it's the shame and guilt. My goal is to help you get past that first step so you can get into treatment, to get that help, to walk through the shame. Here is a key. Now, for the majority of people that open up to family, it's amazing that they actually embrace and say, we kind of knew what was going on. We tend to think nobody knows. We keep all of it in the dark and in the secrets. But people can pick up on stuff. So most of the time they say they kind of already knew. But even beyond those that didn't know, they welcomed them and said, oh my gosh, because what it does is it gives the family hope. It sees a hopeless position, and just by planting the seed of possibility of, so this is the issue, we didn't even know what the issue was, but now that we have identified it, we can get help. The shame and guilt is internal. It is so rare. Now, I'm going to speak to those of you that are even in the rarest rare that we rarely ever see. But those that do, and the family says, there is shame. Well, guess what? That's not on you. That's one of the toughest things that it takes to learn for those very few that go through this part of the aspect, is when an individual comes forward and says, here's what I'm struggling with, I need help. And for that rare minority that says, you've brought shame, we're able to say, well, that's okay. Because I'm gonna get help, and now that I've identified it and accepted it, now there is hope. And guess what? For those few that do that, that's their issue, not mine. It's one of the most difficult concepts to understand, but once I do understand it, I don't have to take other people's crap on. I can work through my own, and then here's the beauty of it. When I take that step, then when I change, when I learn the tools, when I learn the daily habits, when I learn everything that I need to about this whole form of addiction, and I come out on the other side, I can then go back and start to help those that couldn't help themselves. I can start working with the family member that may not understand, that may contribute to this stigma and feel the shame. And then as I change, as people see the life that I'm now living, now I can help educate them. But again, that's the rarity. So if any of this resonates with you, please give us a phone call. We want to make sure that we are here to help you through any fear or shame or guilt that you may have, because it's not your fault. There's a wonderful saying, it's not my fault what happened to me, but it's my responsibility what I do with it. I'm going to say that again. It's not my fault of what happened to me, but it is my responsibility what I do with it today and moving forward. At some point throughout your life, you felt a part of something bigger. You felt a part of a brotherhood, a sisterhood, camaraderie. And a lot of the times, when I start actively engaging in that addiction with whatever I'm struggling with, I tend to isolate and I no longer feel that connection, and that adds all this weight that's pressing down. That's why one of the things that we do here is we help build that community. We help find out what a life worthy of a calling is for you and help you re-engage with that. Because this whole life that's worthy of a calling can be lifelong. It doesn't have to be for this finite amount of time that an individual serves or in school or training or whatever that is. We can look at this and say, I've experienced this before. I know what I'm capable of. And then we learn how to literally cascade that across the rest of our lives so we can build and it becomes a stepping stone. See, we all have stories. Your story doesn't define you to what you used to be. Your story is another stepping stone. And once we take the lessons from that and step through the fear into the courage. See, people think courage has no fear. But it's not courage unless you step through the fear. It's just a decision. But we recognize there's fear there, and that's okay. As I step through that fear into the unknown and I start to link these labels and attachments to what could possibly be, then I have the chance to living a life worth living. So there's a decision now. And that decision is, do I feel something from within, something deep down inside? Maybe not a huge voice, maybe just a small little whisper of saying, now is the time. I can get outside of myself. There are people out there that understand what I'm going through. I remember one of the most powerful moments I saw is when two guys were going through this process and actually going through the other side, and this fear was holding this one person back. And I've never seen a saying just instantly work with a person. But I'll never forget what he said. He turned to him, he said, look, he said, I've got your 6. We've got this. And in that moment, the person stepped through the fear, through that shame, through that guilt, and began the healing process. So that's the decision you have. If any of this resonates with you, if you feel even the smallest voice, then that means to pick up the phone and to call and to ask some questions.